Hello, and welcome to Book of the Mouse Club, episode 68, Monday, December 13th, 2021.
Morning, monsieur.
Where are you off to?
The bookshop. I just finished the most wonderful story about a beanstalk and an ogre and
That's nice. Marie! The baguettes! Hurry up!
I'm sorry, but how can one possibly pay attention to a book with no pictures in it?
My dear child, there are a great many good books in this world without pictures.
I almost bounced clear out of the book. Some bouncing, huh?
Come home or make myself known.
J. Thaddeus Turtle, Esquire. Have you never met him? You will find his story in this delightful little book, The Wind and the Willows.
I've come to return the book I borrowed.
Finished already?
Oh, I couldn't put it down. Have you got anything new?
Welcome back. I'm your host, Courtney, and I am joined, as always, by the Bob Cratchit to my Tiny Tim, who did not die, my lovely co-host, Emily.
Happy holidays, listeners. Thank you for joining us for our seasonal selection.
And today we're joined by a special guest reader and fellow University of Maryland alumni, Dr. Paul Cote. Paul is a close friend of our recent guest, my boyfriend, Dr. Doug, and a previous guest of Notably Disney, where he joined Podcast About Brett to discuss the music and score of The Lion King. Paul received his PhD and MA in English from the University of Maryland with a BA with distinction from University of Colorado Boulder. Paul remains at the University of Maryland, where he teaches a variety of classes based on literary and cultural studies, writing and rhetoric, media studies, creative writing, animation, and film studies. He frequently teaches seminars on Disney-themed and Disney-adjacent topics, including the Disney studio and the animation industry, cartoons on the page and on the screen, and Disney without Disney, the afterlives of children's media icons. In addition to his excellent and diverse teaching, Dr. Cote maintains an active research agenda through peer-reviewed publications and his research area, and regular participation in academic conferences, where he often presents on topics related to his scholarship and teaching. We are pleased to have him join us on the show today. Welcome, Paul.
Hello. Thank you for having me. Don't I now sound fancy?
Absolutely.
We always love having fellow University of Maryland alumni and Marylanders on the show with us. So it's good to have someone else who knows where the Jim Henson Kermit the Frog statue is and why we love it so much.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And we're going to get to talk about Muppets today, which I know you're passionate about, but you're also really passionate about The Christmas Carol, which is why we asked you to join us specifically for this episode. So to kind of learn a little bit more about you and our topic today, what is it about this Dickens classic that you love so much?
You know, it's funny. I spent so much time trying to prep for this, and that question, I still don't know how to answer exactly. I think it's, I've always been Christmas has always been very big in my family, and I'm kind of what I've been referred to as a jolly fellow, as it were. I'm a big Christmas guy. I love the whole, all the decorations, the whole idea that I think this book really, in some ways, originates of it being this time of the year where everyone is supposed to be nice to each other, and generally think of the best of each other. And I think that if you grow up in a Christmas-centric household, in some ways, especially if it's a more secular version of Christmas, this story just really is impossible to avoid, and it gets just into your bloodstream because there are so many adaptations, and there are so many different ways of untangling all of the different strands. It's gothic, it's whimsical, it's funny in some moments, it's terrifying in others. It's this harrowing emotional journey, but it's also open-hearted enough that you can just as easily make it accessible to children as to, jaded adults. And I think also just all of the different adaptations that all find these stridently different ways of grappling onto different aspects of the story, I think just make it both fascinating and as a way of just kind of tracing certain core human values that this book really brings together in ways that few are able to pull off that way. Yeah, that kind of felt like word salad, but hopefully you get the idea.
Yeah, I think we picked the right guest for this episode for sure. Well, as we often do when we're comparing literature that inspired Disney and its films as well, we like to provide a brief history of the author and its text. So, Emily, I will turn it over to you for that.
Sure. So here's a little bit of history, Charles Dickens and A Christmas Carol specifically. So Dickens was born in 1812 in Portsmouth, England. During his childhood, his father was sent to debtor's prison when he was 10, and by 12, he was a child laborer in a factory. Many children met a similar fate during the Industrial Revolution as manufactured labor was in high demand and the gap between the wealthy and working classes widened. And Dickens' novels are heavily influenced by this childhood and the growing state of destitution in England's poor, especially its children. His writing aimed not only to entertain, but to be a commentary on the realities of England's working class to motivate generosity from those more fortunate. A Christmas Carol is no exception to these themes and was published on December 19th, 1843 in London by Chapman and Hall and illustrated by John Leech. In my brief research, there are different events that inspired the story. There's no consensus about what specifically he was doing that he was like, yes, I'm going to write this story. But all accounts are related to philanthropic work, trying to support the poor, make reforms in the community. And the 1840s were particularly hard for England's working class and are nicknamed the Starving 40s. This also is going to align with the same time as the Irish potato famine, just to give us a little bit more grounding if you're more familiar with that. So Dickens knew he wanted to tackle themes, which we will see in the book, of want and ignorance in his writing. And originally he planned for the work to be a pamphlet titled An Appeal to the People of England on Behalf of the Poor Man's Child, but it very quickly turned into a book with a more narrative structure versus being an instructional pamphlet. And he's influenced by other Christmas tales written by popular authors of the day, such as Washington Irving, which we've read before, and Douglas Jerrold. A Christmas Carol, like his other novels, was an immediate success. There was already an emerging revival of Christmas traditions like caroling, seasonal family gatherings, and decorations, but the book really helped catapult all of that into popularity, and it remains true to this day. So a lot of what we think of as being a very traditional Christmas is rooted in the time period of A Christmas Carol, and that was what was popular, and he helped keep it popular. After reading this, a lot of people wanted to emulate what they saw happening in the book. So by Christmas Eve in 1843, so less than a month, the first editions of the book had already been sold out, and 13 additional printings will be done before the end of 1844. 3 stage adaptations were also performed by February of 1844, only 3 months after the book's initial publication. And in 1849, Dickens started publicly reading his story and continued to do this practice until his death in 1870. A Christmas Carol is not his only Christmas story. He also wrote The Chimes in 1844, The Cricket on the Hearth, 1845, The Battle of Life, 1846, and The Haunted Man and the Ghost's Bargain in 1848. And while these are eagerly consumed by readers, none have quite been as popular as A Christmas Carol.
Thank you so much for that.
So before we really talk about what's in the book, what's all of our backgrounds with this? How familiar are we with A Christmas Carol prior to reading it before this podcast?
Well, this was actually my first time. I believe I attempted to read it in 7th grade, like borrowed it around Christmas time from my teacher's little lending library, but didn't quite finish it in time by the time she had it due back. So I had not read it. My familiarity comes from specifically Mickey's Christmas Carol. That was a big staple for me. So I was so excited to read this as part of our podcast. This has actually been kind of on our to-do list for the past 4 Christmas seasons. I believe when we started planning the podcast, this was up there. It's just other books had come out, but we were so excited to finally get to that. And that meant this was my first time reading it. I think, Paul, you are quite the opposite, right?
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, not in that. I'm guessing quite a few people in the US, at least, Mickey's Christmas Carol is probably the first exposure to the story in general. I didn't read the book itself probably until high school. I think at that point, it's just sort of I understood that. That's great. But at a certain point as an adult, I just got into the habit of rereading it, and it just became a kind of soft tradition for me personally, in part because I think every time I go back to it, I'd start to kind of unravel, this is funny. this is supposed to be funny. And all of the various adaptations that either think it's very serious or think that they're being funny when they make fun of it. I was just so surprised at ways in which Dickens is already sort of making fun of his own story as he's telling it sincerely. And I think that kind of gives it a staying power that makes it easy to kind of pull out every year, especially given that it's so short.
Yeah, I was really surprised. I think when you hear Dickens, you immediately think of like A Tale of Two Cities, which is not short. So I wonder if some people are afraid of picking up A Christmas Carol, thinking like, oh, Charles Dickens. I don't know if anyone's been traumatized by, British literature in high school or something, that they're like, no, I'm not picking up another 1800s author. But it is really short and it's really consumable. It's not hard to read. I will admit, this is the only Dickens book I have ever read. I have not read Oliver Twist or David Copperfield or Tale of Two Cities. It's on the to-do list. It's on the to-be-read pile. But this is the only Dickens I've ever read. This is actually my second time reading it. I read it once, I believe I was in college. I've mentioned on the podcast before, I hit a phase where I was like, I'm going to dedicate myself to reading the classics that everyone throws out there, but who's actually read them. So in that phase, I did read A Christmas Carol, but I haven't picked it up since. So this was my first time rereading it. And I think it's stuck with me a lot more, maybe because I was coming at this, getting ready for this podcast, that I was like a lot more attentive, also watching 3 films right afterwards. It's like its staying power is right here. But yeah, I really enjoyed this experience, and I think I will be revisiting this. I don't know if I'm going to be an every year person, but a lot more frequently, especially during the holiday season.
I paired reading it on my iPad while reading along with an audiobook, and I really enjoyed that experience, probably because the author had a British accent, so it made it that much more real to me. My traumatic Dickens experience is having to read Bleak House in a sophomore class of my English majors. So I get what you're saying there, Emily, for sure. But what I want to hone in here is that this is a ghost story, and ghost stories are usually characteristic of fall or Halloween. But do you think ghost stories work for Christmas as well? Does the story maybe also fit something like a horror genre, a fairy tale? It's a little ambiguous there.
Well, that's in some ways, I think, we think of different holidays as being very separate in terms of what they're supposed to be. Like Christmas is the nice family loving one. Halloween's the scary, impish, ghostly one. And Easter and Valentine's Day and St. Patrick's Day have all kind of taken their little territory. But for most of its history, Christmas sort of was Halloween. It was, it starts as a pagan holiday, and the church tries to orient it towards, birth of Christ, biblical stuff. But throughout, in England at least, it's a holiday where you tell ghost stories. You get really drunk, you pull pranks, you do what we more or less think of as trick-or-treating today. And when you think about it, it's the coldest night of the year, or at least it's close to it. And in an era where there's no electricity, there's no real protection from the cold, you're more or less hunkering down around fires, drinking the alcohol that's finally ready to be consumed because it's now winter, eating the meat you can finally eat without worrying about it getting rotten because it's cold out. And the ghost stories are part of the supernatural fun of it. Dickens grew up with ghost stories as being a huge part of his family's Christmas traditions. And it wasn't really until the 1950s even that kind of fell away. You still hear references to ghost stories, and It's the Most Wonderful Time of the Year, that song you hear Bing Crosby singing. So the idea that scary stuff and Christmas don't fit together, that kind of is something that's new-ish. And Dickens is in some ways, actually, this is less of a ghost story than much of what you would have gotten at Christmas, in that the ghosts are kind of there, but they're not really. Only Marley's dead. The rest of them are ghosts with air quotes around them, but they're more or less angels. So to us now, it might feel a little weird, but that used to be what the holiday was.
Scary ghost stories and tales of the glories of Christmases long, long ago, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So yeah, I would agree. Like, it's for my family, I guess what you're saying, if the more modern Christmas, yeah, ghost stories really wouldn't be common, but I see how it fits, especially like you're saying pre-1950s when all you might have is radio. And before that, there were no other means of entertainment. So when you came together as a family, like now we watch movies together, we watch the Christmas parades, we have more of that digital entertainment to bring us together. But coming together around a story or reading a book is what you would do pre-radio, pre-television. So I could get how that could be more intriguing, more entertaining, more gathering like, especially pre-electric light. You're in a room that's a little dark with just a fire and some candles. It's a very fitting setting for a ghost story.
I'm here for ghost stories all year round. Longtime listeners of the podcast certainly know I am a huge Halloween fan, so I don't mind any blurred lines between them. I really enjoyed the ghostly or spectral aspects of it. I think it works well in that Christmas often falls, or it's always on the 25th, but comes at the end of our Julian calendar. And so I feel like that's really a time for reflection, that week between Christmas and New Year's. You're looking to the year ahead, any changes that you might want to make. So I see that element at play there with the ghosts as what's facilitating that reflection. So it works for me.
I think there's also some sense of, especially for Dickens, ghost stories and Santa Claus, they're similar in that they're in a world, and this was already happening for Dickens' time, and it's certainly happening now, where it seems like there's no mystery left, where technology and industry and progress have more or less taken away any sense that there is some sort of supernatural other world that we can experience personally. A ghost story is this kind of reminder that that's still there, that there's still a fantastical world that we can't quite put on our grid. And Santa Claus and all of that, all those trappings kind of serve a similar function. And I think for Dickens especially, that's kind of the thing he's trying to bring back. There is a, look, I know it's the age of progress, but look at how disgusting this city now is, and look how miserable we are. Wouldn't it be nice to have these stories where anything can happen and where we don't always know what the material world is going to be from one moment to the next?
I think so. That's a really interesting thought, and I like how you frame that. And I think we all still look for that. I mean, that's why a lot of us love Disney and going to the theme parks, is you are looking for that fantasy, that mystical, that break from the reality. And that's interesting kind of about Dickens' writing, is that we're going to have a ghost story that's a break from reality, but he also is commenting on reality too, which is so interesting how he's able to do that in his writing.
So I think Dickens, and I recognize that not everyone here is as familiar with all of his work, but he's often thought of, I think, as being a very emphatically moral novelist, especially in his early novels. Very much I don't know if I call his books based on lessons necessarily, but there is very much this is a moral urgent issue that you need to look at and that needs to change. And A Christmas Carol is definitely really big into that. So I was wondering if you two thought of, as you read this, are there moments where it seems like the themes or morals are really screaming at you, where the author is really kind of gripping you by the shirt and saying, no, you need to pay attention to this. This is important.
Definitely, I saw it the most with The Ghost of Christmas Present. Because towards the time when, so the Ghost of Christmas Present, he ages because he's only, quote, a live spirit on Earth for a day. He's only there for Christmas Day. And as he's aging, and towards the end of his time with Scrooge says, is there a claw or something peeking out under your skirt or his robe? And it's these two children who represent what I actually just read, want and ignorance. And Scrooge keeps trying to look away, and often through his time with the Ghost of Christmas Present, it's like, no, you need to look at this. You need to face this reality. And oftentimes it's the Ghost of Christmas Present who keeps throwing Scrooge's own words back at him. Like when Scrooge asks, like, oh no, please tell me, does Tiny Tim live? And I'm paraphrasing. that part, but then the ghost of Christmas Present says, well, if he's going to die, he better get on with it then, shouldn't he? And decrease the surplus population. And Scrooge, when he hears it himself, is horrified with himself that he said that. And so I really think in that part of the book, like, you get the hints of it, but for me, when he's with the ghost of Christmas Present, it is really thrown in his face that you're creating this world through your want and through your ignorance where there's destitution, and you have to do something about it.
Yeah, I also see it at play in the Ghost of Christmas Past when they're at Fezziwig's party, kind of a really strong contrast between who Scrooge is as a boss to Bob Cratchit versus Fezziwig to all of his employees. You know, the generosity of that character, the time of merriment, the spirit, you know, throwing caution to the wind and throwing this large party really kind of, I think, helps show Scrooge what you can do with your money to bring joy to others. And I also, Emily, thought about when his words are thrown back at him. I think it's also, he says along the lines early about, like, are there no workhouses or poor houses? And that's another line that one of the ghosts throws back at them. So kind of some of those negative pieces at the beginning that get very much thrown right back in your face stood out to me.
And yeah, I think what's interesting is that there are all of these different moral tracks that seem like in any other book, it would be almost impossible for them all to coherently coexist. And Dickens manages to make it seem as though they're all heading in the same direction, because he's trying to address the issue of ignorance socially. Like, you know, because before he wrote this, one of the big kind of turning points for him, like the day that he actually got the idea for the story, he had just given a speech at this fundraiser in Manchester for funding a more or less like a library learning center in today's terms, and more or less said, look, people keep on saying in positions of power that a little knowledge is dangerous, but it seems to me like a little knowledge is lack of, like, ignorance is actually really killing everyone. And if you just let people learn, like, all of these people, like crime and poverty are tied to ignorance. And if we educate people, then they have a means of pulling themselves up. And yet the whole question of ignorance, it's not just socially, because it's also Scrooge. When the two charity fundraisers tell him, you might know about these people, and Scrooge says, I don't want to, it's not my business. Scrooge having to learn about the plight of people who aren't himself is also Scrooge's ignorance being sort of remedied. And the whole idea that Scrooge has to go back and finally face his own childhood and acknowledge that he had a unhappy childhood, and that there is some degree to which understanding that emotionally also helps him understand other people, and understand that there are people who, if you can find pity on your child self, you can learn to find pity and empathy for other people. And all of these, micro and macro ideas about ignorance, they spill into ideas about empathy and charity and giving and decency. And even things like the whole contrast between Christmas being, a religious holiday, but also a big party buck and all. And Dickens finds a way to say, look, drinking and partying is a way of connecting with other people. And that's how you connect with God and with the Bible's teachings. And that's how that also combats ignorance. And that also leads you to a place where you're becoming a decent person. And somehow, like, me even trying to explain that, I still haven't figured out how to make that sound coherent, like talking about it and yet Dickens manages to make it all seem like, of course, these are the same thing. Of course, what Scrooge learns, even though it sounds like 15 different micro things, are all different examples of the same basic learn about other people and yourself, and learn to be decent to each other, and you'll be happier.
I think a lot of the experiences that you're talking about too, that Scrooge looks down on, like Scrooge is very critical of people like, well, I can't afford more food or a bigger home. He's like, well, that's because it almost sounds like make fun of the millennials of like, well, I can't afford a house. What's all the avocado toast you're buying or whatever? It's like, that's kind of Scrooge. He's like, well, if you were more savvy, and he ignores like the bigger structure. But that, you know, spending money to have a family dinner, a big gathering, or wanting a bigger place to live is not really, quote, luxury or unnecessary. Like, there's a difference in Scrooge's mind between like, you're overspent, because even Scrooge, for as rich as he is, everyone, especially Fred, remarks, he's like, you're rich enough, but you live in the shabbiest of homes. You don't heat your own home for yourself and your workers. Like, for someone who can very easily afford these things, all you do is hoard your money. And I think that's what Dickens is getting at, is that like money is meant to be used. It's not meant to be, and look at what it can do when it is used. It's used to provide merriment. It's used to stimulate the economy. It's used to keep families warm and happy and healthy. Like, money has a purpose than just being money. And that's something Scrooge fell into a trap of. Is that making sense?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it's part of the reason that Scrooge is a little easier to sympathize with than he might be if he was living high on the hog and more outwardly hypocritical, because he's not really hypocritical. He doesn't understand how much the system he's bought into isn't just leading him to make other people miserable, but also himself. And a lot of that is also, I think, Dickens' own sort of anxieties about money, because Dickens is terrified of money. He's writing this because he's afraid he's going to go bankrupt. And his father's debtor's prison history, he's always afraid that he is going to end up back there again. And Dickens spends his money much more lavishly than Scrooge does. But I think you get a pretty clear sense that when his fiance breaks up with him and says, "You fear the world too much," it kind of crystallizes Scrooge's problem in a nutshell. It's that even as an old man, he's afraid that if he lights too many candles, uses too much coal, that somehow he'll end up back in the poorhouse. Or I guess he was never in the poorhouse, but back as that lonely child, alone in a schoolhouse, not realizing that he has created a world for himself where he's always that child. And he's hurting himself, as his nephew says. Like, he's the one who ultimately gets hurt by his behavior more than anybody else.
Yeah, I was just thinking of Fred. Something else I picked up is there is quite a theme about death. And Scrooge is also very clearly afraid of death when we're with the ghost of Christmas Yet to Come. It does take him a little to realize, like, this whole time we are talking about you. I don't know how that wasn't obvious to him. Maybe he's in self-denial of, it can't be me, that can't be me. But we also see this in the adaptations, and I think actually the Mickey's Christmas Carol is way more forward with it. We'll talk about the adaptation, but that ghost of Christmas Yet to Come in the Mickey version, I think it's Pete. He says, "You're the richest man in the cemetery." And something I think Dickens is trying to lean home is we're all the same. Especially if we want to go down the Christian religion path. There's, ashes to ashes, dust to dust. Everyone at some point is going to have their judgment day. That's a very predominant thought, religious practice, religious belief, or belief in general for most. And he's trying to get to Scrooge of, you might be the wealthiest man, you've done all of this, but you are no better than anyone else. We get that with the ghosts too in the book, when he can see all of the ghosts who are trapped in the world, who did live above everyone else, and now they are wishing they did more to benefit mankind or their communities. Now they can't, and now they're the ones stuck on Earth when it's the others who get to go on to heaven and their afterlife.
Yeah, and I think there's something weirdly optimistic, even at the book's darkest, in the way that it conceives of death and of even what hell would look like, because Dickens is inventing a very secular version of the afterlife. He's not really addressing hell, which always makes me kind of irritated when the adaptations send Scrooge to hell, because the fear isn't supposed to be going to hell. The fear is what Marley shows him early on. It's this idea that ultimately, deep down, we all understand that we're supposed to help each other, that that's what makes our existence meaningful. And the people who don't follow through on that when they have the ability to in Dickens' world, when they die, their punishment isn't a punishment. It's not that they're being tortured or burned or whatnot. It's just that now that there's nothing else, you are fully aware of how important it is to be part of the community and help other people. And the agony is not being able to. And I think Scrooge's agony at the end is realizing, now I finally know what I should have been doing, and it's too late.
So why do we think Christmas is important? We read this at Christmas time. It's called A Christmas Carol, but a lot of those themes we just talked about and the ordeal that Scrooge goes through, really, we could put this at any time of year. So why do you think Dickens chose Christmas, and is the holiday itself important to the story?
I'm probably approaching this from our current modern sense, as I touched on before about the themes of reflection. I don't know that maybe the capitalist ideas of a New Year's resolution were something that existed at that time. But for me, it's a time of repentance. It's a time to reflect and think, what do I want to change for the year ahead, as I said before. But also what may be modern, but I do see at play in the story, is the idea of charity. You have the two collectors who come around at the beginning, and Scrooge, they ask what they want to put him down for, and he says nothing. They say, do you wish to remain anonymous? And he's like, no, I'm not going to give you anything, but certainly comes around to make a donation at the end. So I see that theme of charity and giving back as something that continues to this day. You know, we often see different groups collecting at busy shopping malls as a time to give back to those less fortunate. So that ties in with Christmas for me.
Well, I think for Dickens specifically, there are reasons to make this about Christmas that are both very personal, but also society-based. Because as a child, Dickens had parents who were, kind of party animals. That's why the dad ended up in debtor's prison to a certain extent. And they were big on Christmas because, again, Christmas at this point in history, it isn't this holiday that takes over the whole month and that is universally in Western culture celebrated. It comes and goes, and it's largely associated with kind of parties and whatnot. There are points in history where it's actually banned, outlawed, because the government's like, people get way too out of control. They get drunk. They break through their masters' mansions and whatnot. It's not even really in the Bible. This needs to be stopped. And when it lingers, it tends to linger in more rural areas where there isn't so much government control and where poverty is a little more intense. And so I think Dickens is both, on his mind, he has personal attachment, nostalgia, because here is a point in his childhood where things were happy before he was sent to work at a factory to bail his parents out of their debt. But socially, we're coming in this era where there's a depression, poverty is widespread. There's this horrifying law passed in 1834, the New Poor Law, which the book references, that more or less says if you're destitute, poor, the only possible way the government will help you is to send you to a poorhouse, which is basically a prison, where you'll be treated so horribly that only the people who are absolutely desperate would even think about going there. And Dickens is sort of trying to say, okay, well, what if we take this holiday that's already kind of coming back, that is pretty widespread in being accessible to poor people and not just the aristocrats, and emphasize all these different little things that make it fun and that allow it to make life endurable, and really emphasize using this holiday as a vehicle to both awaken people to the plight of the poor, but also to give everyone something to celebrate, something to cling to while things are so rough.
It's so great that we have you on the show that knows a lot more about Dickens in the Victorian era. That makes a lot of sense. And also thinking, I mean, this is more pop culture, but like I love Victoria from PBS Masterpiece. So what I've learned from her through a fictionalized telling of her life is she also really enjoyed the party life and throwing grand balls and getting to be the queen. So that would make sense to me of why the holiday kind of makes a comeback in her reign.
Yeah.
It sounds like something she would be very into, of like, I want there to be big parties and lots of spirit and decorations and whatnot. So I could see why this is also very much that commentary of this particular era and why we go to Christmas as the setting. And maybe what we said before too, like where ghost stories fit in, like this, it's a very potentially spooky time, or as Courtney, you said, that time of reflection, and you know, you think of your past, your Ghost of Christmas Past, what's happening now, what's coming for the future. So I think all of that could contribute to why Christmas is very much the setting of the story.
I think in addition to those spooky elements, there's some funny moments as well. We'll be discussing the Disney film adaptations of the story just in a little bit. We have a few more questions to get through. Those films absolutely use humor in their retelling of the story, but did you also see humor in this book?
Yeah, I mean, I think, like I said earlier, at a certain point, rereading it, I just realized, there are so many jokes in this. There are so many bits. I think part of it is that my theory, I don't know if this has been something scholars have remarked on, but you know, he writes it in a very quick period. He basically 6 weeks because he gets the idea fairly close to Christmas, and so he has to write it and produce it himself because his publisher won't do it. He has to more or less self-publish the book. But he gets the story in his head so quickly, taking evening walks, that it just kind of pours out of him. And I kind of wonder if, because the story forms in his head so concretely, by the time he starts writing it, he's already able to be kind of his own peanut gallery to his own story. It's like he's both telling Christmas Carol, but he's also the Family Guy commentary of A Christmas Carol while it's happening. Like he gets out, Marley was dead as a doornail. And then within a moment, he's doing his tight five on, what's the deal with doornails? Are they so dead? I don't think they're so dead. I guess just idioms, right? Or he's like, Marley was dead to begin with. You have to know this. I mean, think about it. If you went to see Hamlet, you didn't know the ghost was dead, he'd just be some guy, right? And there are all these places where I always think it's funny when the films, especially the funny ones, they think they're the ones making fun of the story, but they don't realize often that the story makes fun of itself, but it pokes fun at its own kind of dramatic presentation so frequently, but it's almost like you're getting two stories at once.
I think it's also just because we don't talk or think or write the same way. Because I've had conversations with students. I teach high school, and I'll see, you know, a student in AP literature, and they've got Pride and Prejudice or another 19th century novel that they have to read, and they're like, this is so boring. I'm like, actually, it's a comedy. I think it was Emma I was talking to with one of my students, and I love Jane Austen. I've read Austen a few times, and I'm like, actually, it's a comedy. She's making fun of stuff, but because they don't joke and talk the way we do now, unless you spend a lot of time with it, read it, reread it, and get used to that voice, it's harder to pick up. And I think you're right that when we talk about these adaptations, like, I know Muppets Christmas Carol is going to be funny. It's the Muppets.
Right.
But then coming into reading Christmas Carol, I was like, oh, there's some jokes in here. Okay. It is a serious story, but it does have some, humor. I think the humor comes more from the narrator than from the characters, per se.
It's definitely the narrator for me, and I think that came through especially for me listening to it as an audiobook while reading around, because I had the delivery of the narrator. I don't know, I certainly read with intonation when I read out loud, but when I'm reading to myself, I read so quickly that having the narrator read it with the intonation really helped me to see the humor. One part, I don't know, I just found it kind of silly, but this is, I believe, when the Ghost of Christmas Present is appearing, or it might have been Christmas Past, but I found the passage, and it said, the curtains of his bed were drawn aside, and Scrooge starting up into half-recumbent attitude, found himself face to face with the unearthly visitor who drew them. As close to it is as I am now to you, and I am standing in the spirit at your elbow. And I just like, oh, okay,
so much.
Cool.
I love that so much.
There he is. So that kind of, I guess, the omnipresentness of the narrator, but the self-awareness, I don't know, I found that a little bit to be dry humor, but that did make me chuckle as my invisible narrator in my earbuds said it to me, so to speak.
Yeah, the narrator's also always like, when you meet Fred and he's like, if you know someone as friendly as Fred, introduce him to me and I'll start stalking him. Like it's just he's so extra. Or where he gets weirdly creepy about the scene where you see Scrooge's ex-fiance, and now she has children and they're playing with her hair, and he's like, well, I wouldn't give to be one of those kids, right? It's just,
yeah,
come on, man. Let's pull back just a little bit. And I think also it's partially that we have a different kind of lens for comedy, but I think also it's the way these books are often taught and the way they're presented to us. Once they become canonical, quote unquote, literature, I think there's a resistance to acknowledge that they're also silly. And a lot of adaptations try to ignore those aspects of them. And a lot of scholarship tries to, until fairly recently, pretend those parts aren't part of the story. Because Dickens was known for being extremely funny. Like it's only really his later works where he gets super somber. But David Copperfield and Oliver Twist and the Pickwick Papers, there are full-on Monty Python routines in a lot of these. And also, I think Courtney, as she discovered, listening to audiobooks, if there is one author who really benefits from audiobooks, it's Dickens, because so much of the humor is often based on him creating these ridiculous accents. Sometimes he's built like himself, and you only really catch often the broad comedy of that when you have someone who can really just nail the characters and get the audio in your head. So you two read this for, if not the first time, then I think it sounds like you both kind of were able to focus on it for the first time. Is that about accurate?
Yes.
Yeah.
So what stands out the most to you as favorite parts, least favorite parts, characters that you fell in love with, characters where you're like, okay, maybe let's keep going here?
I think something that surprised me the most is, I don't know if it's maybe how it's portrayed more in media or like how people talk about it. Like, yes, Bob Cratchit and Tiny Tim are a big part of the story, but they're not as big a part of the story as I thought they would be. Does that make sense? Like, we see them, we go to their house, but I feel like because everyone, Tiny Tim, God bless us, everyone. Like, Scrooge is the main character, but I always felt like we were going to spend more time with the Cratchits than we do. And they're not as central to the story. And I'm a little surprised, like, reading more about Dickens, that he wants to help a lot of the children in his background, that this is really the one child in the story that you really feel sympathetic for. And we don't see him more. Like, I thought he would focus more on Tiny Tim and the children. And we get more of that more in the setting of where, like, Scrooge is walking through the streets and the narrator's telling you there's a child begging at the window for a piece of bread. There's Cratchit's other kids coming home from the factories, working all day. It's more of just part of blended into the fabric of the story versus I thought we would get, like, Scrooge a lot more FaceTime with Tiny Tim than the one encounter in the house. I don't know why I thought there would be more after reading it. Like, duh, of course this makes sense. But I feel like maybe the way we talk about Tiny Tim so much in popular media when you reference this story, like, I thought he himself, other than being at the table, Merry Christmas, everyone, and oh no, did he die? That's kind of it.
Yeah.
I think part of that has to do with the ending, and maybe it's just our familiarity with Mickey's Christmas Carol and even Muppets to some degree. The book more so has, on Christmas Day, he goes to his nephew Fred's, joins in that celebration, and then the ending takes us to work the next day where he's like, I'm going to chastise Bob Cratchit for being late, but then it's like a bit of a prank to him. And That's where he gives him his raise, whereas in the films, he goes to their house, the Cratchit's house, on Christmas Day. So you get more of that scene. I guess on Christmas, like I'm picturing Mickey's little son reaching in the bag for the teddy bear. But within the text, that's still that ending, just everything after the ghost of Christmas yet to come is probably my favorite part, where it comes together, the lesson is learned. And I think Scrooge is my favorite character. He goes from being, very unlikable to having this transformation. And I think he's such a fascinating character, and we'll certainly get into portrayals of him in a bit.
Courtney, for once, you and I don't have the same favorite part. Oh. I actually really enjoy the beginning and the setting up of all of it. I like the building anticipation, and the first ghost getting his backstory. I love character backstories. So getting the other spirits are equally entertaining and exciting to read, but I really liked the buildup of establishing our setting, getting to meet Scrooge. I agree that Scrooge is my favorite character. He's who we spend the most time with. He's got the full arc, but I really enjoyed the first half of the book. I liked that building up. What about you, Paul? For someone who's read this multiple times.
I mean, I think in terms of, Emily, your surprise about Tiny Tim Bob Cratchit, I'm guessing a lot of that probably has to do with the way that movies, it's like at some point they all decided what they were going to cut and what they were going to keep. And it makes sense. Like the whole, the Christmas present sequence where Scrooge gets taken, all around England and to lighthouses and to ships at sea. And that's pretty easy to cut from a movie because it's not based on staying characters and it's expensive to cut to film. Whereas Cratchit and Tiny Tim, they're characters. And when you cut so much around them, they become more important. And I think also Tiny Tim in the book, he's not the angelic kind of angel that he becomes when he's Robin in the Muppets version. Like he's not especially fond of Scrooge. Like he doesn't chime in to make sure they toast him. He actually is kind of upset that they're breaking up Scrooge. He's more of a kid. And I think that while he's in a lot of ways, he's obviously a giant symbol, he doesn't get the sort of role as being the angelic moral center of the story that I think we're expecting him to have based on so many movie adaptations. For me, I think I'm like you two, though. I think Scrooge, it sounds kind of, I realize, I don't like saying like, oh, the main character, he's my favorite, but Scrooge is such a great character. And I think as you read the story, what I really appreciate is the way that his transformation doesn't happen instantaneously. You see it happening organically as the story goes along. You see him becoming more vulnerable. In the moment he sees his past self, you see the change kind of taking place. You see him kind of being a little bit funny and when he deals with Marley. You see him in different he's got a lot of nuances that are fun to play, and then I think often actors have a hard time paying service to all of, and that makes him just so, there's a reason so many want to try. In terms of things that I don't like, I don't think I'd cut anything, but I probably could do without the scene where all of the Christmas future sequence where the thieves are picking apart his belongings. And I feel like the point that scene tries to make is already made so clearly by seeing the way his former business colleagues don't care about him. And I also feel like every time a movie includes that scene, and they always do, the story just stops cold. And it's weirdly, for a story that's supposed to be about the way that we should be nicer to poor people, it kind of creates like, oh, look at these awful poor people going through his things. Like, isn't that funny and gross? So that's my only big note. Please cut this. We don't need it.
I think I might have to agree. Well, when we were watching, we're going to talk about the adaptations. We keep saying this. That adds to the authenticity of how well did you stick to the book if you include those little vignettes, like one that also gets cut that didn't in the 2009 version but did in the others, was like when he dies, he sees a couple who have a mortgage through him that feel guilty for rejoicing that he's dead because they know this means it's going to be easier. They basically just got an extension on their loan because they have to take the time now to pass the credit to someone else to manage the accounts and whatever. And he's like, oh, by then I'm definitely going to have the money. It's going to be fine. And so like they're rejoicing that he died. But that gets cut a lot too. And you're right, like that section, they really harp on how much people really disliked him. And that Christmas Yet to Come is like, if you don't change, this is how people feel about you. But yeah, there's like 3 or 4 scenes of that in the book when, 1 or 2 is really enough probably as a reader.
I kind of wondered too, because I think that by far the most powerful of those scenes is the couple who is rejoiced that their loan
I did
shark
like
is
that
dead.
better.
But I think a lot of adaptations like to try to depoliticize the story, to make it seem as though it's about a single mean man and not about a corrupt, society that tries to brutalize poverty and blame people in poverty for their own misfortune. And that's a scene that you really can't include without making people think, yeah, I guess if every person who runs Sally Mae just died, my life would be a lot better. And maybe we should do something about that. And I wonder if there's a reason why filmmakers like to pretend that part doesn't exist.
So we want to get to all these adaptations we keep referring to. So to transition us there, I want to know from all of us, why do we think this story is still relevant and popular today? 1843, 2021, we're still reading it. It's still performed on the stage yearly. It's had multiple adaptations, not just from Disney. We're only talking about Disney's adaptations, but there's many adaptations of this. So why do you think people love this story?
I think there's certainly a timelessness to it, and the adaptations, in addition to the ones that we're going to talk about today, were something that I want to hit on. We've talked about the themes, and I believe that those can be adapted across a bunch of different scenarios. I'm thinking of, we won't be discussing these in depth, but there's a Vanessa Williams musical, A Diva's Christmas Carol, or from the 80s, Bill Murray's Scrooged, where he's a network TV executive. I think it's fun to take this familiar story and place it into different industries or different time periods to see just, again, how timeless it remains.
Yeah, I think there's also, the narrative, because it's a short novella, it fits pretty tidily into a hour and a half, 2 hour, film. And without a lot of changes. In fact, a lot of them add things because it's so short. There's a great Alistair Sim version from 1951 that I think falls short in some respects, but in that it doesn't really seem to care that much about the Christmas aspect of the story. But it adds a elaborate backstory that kind of just shows you, year by year, the way young Scrooge sells his soul piece by piece until he becomes the person he is today. And I think that there's a reason that so many actors want to play Scrooge. You start and you get to be this absolute nasty monster. You get to just sink your teeth into being the worst. Thinking of a G-rated word, jerk, that the audience can just throw tomatoes at. And by the end, you have to be like Santa Claus, and you have to sell the audience on the idea that this change came across organically. And that's just a buffet for an actor, and not all of them pull it off, but the ones that do just get to so many opportunities to thrive. And because the story has so many different aspects to it, you could do a version where Christmas is barely even part of the story. You're cutting a good, I'd say 40% of the novel by doing that, but you can do it, and some movies do, and it still works. You could do one that more or less doubles down on Christmas and makes Scrooge kind of a side character to what's more or less a big celebration for the audience, and that still works. And you can toss Mr. Magoo and Uncle Scrooge and Kermit and Fred Flintstone and who else into the story, and some versions will work better than others, but they all more or less work. And there are only so many stories where they're so just rock solid that they can withstand so many different takes while still more or less functioning.
I think too, some of the history we talked about of Christmas reemerging as the Christmas we know it today, since the 1840s, like that Victorian feel, that very, holly and garland and wreaths and snow and carolers, that has stuck since this was written. And so I think there is also that timelessness, but also that nostalgia. We like nostalgia. We like tradition. I think it's also stuck around that even though he's written, I have not read his other Christmas tales. I'm feeling compelled to do so. Just to see.
More on that.
Possibly to see, but there's a reason this one stuck. And I think it's kind of the same way people love the same Christmas movies or Christmas songs, even though you will never listen to them any other time of the year, or you're not familiar with that artist's work beyond that one song. We like that repetition and that routine. It's homely. So I think being able to be so successful when it was, and for Dickens to then continue to read it every year himself, he kind of helped make people like, this is part of my Christmas routine. I read A Christmas Carol, or I go see it on stage, like the Nutcracker. I have plenty of friends that it is their tradition. They have to see the Nutcracker after Thanksgiving and before New Year's. So it helps keep it alive because the season and the holiday itself is so rooted in tradition.
Well, it certainly does, and that is why we are here today. So let's get into those 3 Disney adaptations. Disney has adapted A Christmas Carol 3 times, first in 1983 with the short film Mickey's Christmas Carol, then nearly 10 years later as a partnership with the Jim Henson Company in 1992, and most recently in 2009 as a motion capture animation starring Jim Carrey. So let's briefly go through each of these adaptations individually, and then we can compare across all 3. So first up is Mickey's Christmas Carol. This short film was largely adapted from the 1974 Disneyland Records audio musical and adaptation of Dickens' Christmas Carol. The vinyl record featured similar dialogue and cast of characters, with the exception that the first and last Christmas Carol ghosts were portrayed by Merlin and the witch from Snow White, respectively. The animated short was produced by Walt Disney Pictures and released by Buena Vista Distribution on December 16, 1983, with the theatrical reissue of The Rescuers. This marked a triumphant return to the silver screen for Mickey Mouse. It was the first original Mickey Mouse theatrical cartoon produced in over 30 years and was the first Academy Award nomination for a Mickey Mouse short since Mickey and the Seal in 1948. The nomination was in the Best Animated Short Film category. Unfortunately, it did not win, but it has remained a beloved Christmas tradition for many of us ever since. This adaptation stars Scrooge McDuck as Ebenezer Scrooge, Mickey Mouse as Bob Cratchit, Goofy as Jacob Marley, Jiminy Cricket, Willie the Giant, and Pete as the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. So let's go into our overall likes and dislikes of this adaptation.
Yeah, I've got mixed feelings about it in that, it's the one I grew up with first. I think for many people that's the case. And the animation is beautiful. I watch it every year. I love it. But I love it more the way you love an ornament you put in your tree than as a story. Because I think that as an adaptation of A Christmas Carol, it doesn't really seem very interested in getting into the heart of the story. Like it seems more like just won't this be fun to put Disney characters in these roles? There's never really a point. I know maybe the scene where Mickey Mouse holds Tiny Tim's crutch, where the emotion actually seems to be at least gesturing towards something real. But a lot of it, Scrooge is very much Scrooge McDuck from Carl Barks's comics in this. He's wily, he's funny, he's too much of a rascal in the early going for us to really be that afraid of him. And he's too much of a rascal at the end for it to feel like he's really changed that much. And I don't know that I really even am bothered by that. It's still a fun thing to watch. But I think when this becomes like we're comparing the Christmas Carol adaptations, to me, that's like putting an SNL sketch alongside the actual movie it's a parody of. Even though, again, I think the animation is gorgeous all the way through, and especially coming when it came in the studio, as I know it was kind of struggling to get audiences for its animation. I think it's really astonishing how much labor they put into that aspect of it.
So I actually watched this one twice. First, because I just was going to enjoy it for nostalgia's sake, and it's Mickey on screen, and I loved it. The second time, to like really watch it and try to put that feeling aside and think more about it. Overall, what I like is I think it is an excellent introduction to the story, that it makes it accessible to kids. It makes it accessible to whole families in a sitting. And you do get pretty much the essence of you get the whole story in 26 minutes. It is fast. Scrooge's development from being Scrooge to being Happy Scrooge is definitely sped up, but I don't think you ever cut anything truly out of the story or alter it so much that you lose A Christmas Carol. So that's something I like about it. One big dislike I have, my girl Minnie doesn't get to talk, and I think Minnie should have talked. Emily Cratchit, I don't want to say it's my namesake, but I'm going to for the sake of this podcast today. She's a little spunky. She is a woman who takes care of her family. She has a word or two to say to Bob about toasting to Scrooge and, standing up for her family. And Minnie doesn't talk at all. And I don't know if that's a production choice or a financial choice when creating this, but she doesn't talk. And I was like, oh, we love Minnie. Minnie should talk.
That was always disappointing to me as well. This, like many of us, you've already shared my first introduction. I kind of have a weird story about it, so I'm going to go on this tangent. But my mom has gone to the same hairdresser for probably nearly 40 years, and I would often accompany her. I was getting my hair cut, but she was getting her cut, color, all of that done. So I had time to spend in that salon, and there was a kids corner with a VHS and a VCR, and they maybe had like Fern Gully and Mickey's Christmas Carol, and no matter what time of year, I would just always put on Mickey's Christmas Carol. So I associated it. I'm not saying that was a bad memory. It was a fond memory. It was a good 26 minutes to kill out of my probably 120 being spent in that hair salon. So definitely my first introduction. It made it accessible. As Emily said, I was always just so delighted to see these Disney characters in different forms, taking on different roles. I think we'll get to a bit more in the discussion, kind of embodying maybe roles that you wouldn't traditionally think of. Like Donald as Fred makes sense because he literally is Scrooge McDuck's nephew, but Donald has a different personality than he normally does. He's very jovial, and I think that is one of the strongest things that I like about this one, is Donald in particular.
This one's also the shortest, because the other two films we're looking at are films, they're feature length. Do you all feel like it's an issue that this one's only 26 minutes that hurt the story at all for you?
I don't know if it hurts the story, because for what it is, like I just said, you get the Christmas Carol. Scrooge is Scrooge, and he's a mean person in the town, and he needs to go through this journey to become better, and he does. I just feel like it's a little sped up, but if you're looking at the geared audience that it's for, particularly, you're probably going to watch this on Christmas Day. If you want someone to sit down for 30 minutes when they've got all those presents in the corner as a kid, you want to keep their attention for what they can. It's a Christmas special. It's for TV. I think it does a very good job for what they were aiming to do, apart from Minnie not talking.
Yeah, I will say I didn't know what I was missing until I was introduced to the broader story or longer adaptations, and how short it was felt abundantly clear to me in preparing for this episode. I don't know what order each of you watched the films in, but we did the 2009 first, kind of because I wanted to get it out of the way, but we'll get there. Then we did the Muppet Christmas Carol, and then the following night we watched Mickey's Christmas Carol, and I was like, oh wait, it's over? Like, as we were watching, I'm like, man, this is moving so fast. But for an audience, primarily geared at children, or as a short preceding a film, I think it hits the right beats. If not, it's certainly not hitting all of them, but it is hitting enough that the integrity to the story remains there, for me at least.
I don't know if it's fair to say for me that the shortness is the problem, because there's an even shorter version by Richard Williams in the 70s, who you all likely know as the guy who did the animation for Roger Rabbit. And his version is for TV. So it's like 22, 24 minutes. And he kind of, just by making it feel like you're just flipping through the pages of the story and just getting to the key moments one after the other, I think gets the essence really powerfully in a short time span. For Mickey, I do feel like the choices they make to shorten it, because I grew up with it first. That was the only one I knew. I didn't realize what was missing. When I saw A Muppet Christmas Carol as a kid, the first film version I saw of the story, I went in thinking, how is this going to work as a full movie? Then watching it, realizing, oh, when it's a full movie, the things they add actually make it an emotionally devastating story and not just a cute trying to play with these characters. And I think what I feel now watching it is that Scrooge does go through a journey, and it hits some of the big points, but because it cuts the childhood scene, and because it has to rush him from being crotchety to being remorseful, as a kid, I was with the impression that the reason he changes is because he's scared straight. Because he thinks, oh, I'm going to go into this fiery pit if I don't get my act together, which should not be the takeaway of the story. It's not about being scared straight because you think you're going to hell. It's about realizing that there's a world around you and that you owe something to, and that owe something to you too if you put that back into it. And I think that by cutting so much of that aspect of the story and leaning so heavily on the spectacle of that fiery coffin opening up, it creates, I think, in some ways, the opposite moral that the story should hold in my mind. But that's also, I could be responding to the fact that as a child, that part scared me so much that everything else got overshadowed by it. I don't know.
No, I think that's a fair point. But overall, like, if this is the only thing you saw and you said, oh, do you know the story of A Christmas Carol? You would know all the main points. So I think it does a good job with that. But I think you make a really good point that the more I watch the other versions, this was the first one I watched. I went in the order that we're discussing them. That you're right. The childhood scene is so important to understanding Scrooge. It's not just he became obsessed with money. There's a lot more there. I kind of wish even Dickens did this, thinking about some likes and dislikes of the book. The sister comes in the book and says, we're here to take you home from school. Father's not as mean as he used to be. I'm like, tell me more about the father.
Yeah. What
is happening at home that, Scrooge's refuge is school? Or he's also banished there and hasn't been allowed to come home since. And even Dickens doesn't really go further than that about the sister. But then we learn that, the sister passes away, and that's Fred's mom. And that's why Fred, I think, wants to have a connection with Scrooge, because that's the only connection he has left to his mom. So there's actually a lot more there behind, like, why is he so mean to his nephew? Like, you just don't know, other than, I don't like Christmas. Stop telling me why you love Christmas. But really, he's got a whole wall up against his nephew because he's hurting from losing his sister, but Fred is hurting from losing his mother, but wants to connect instead of block out. There's actually a lot more complexity there. But overall, from this short, though, you would get the main points of the story. But yeah, we miss a lot of Scrooge's development.
If you're not Christmas caroled out, the 1951 version actually it builds that part out a lot, and it puts a pin in the way that at one point the Ghost of Christmas Past tells Scrooge, hey, look at that. Your father blamed you for causing your mother's death when you were born. Isn't that interesting that your sister also died when she gave birth to your nephew? Isn't that interesting that you're so mean to him? The way your father was mean to you. And kind of spells what Dickens only faintly implies out in more obvious terms.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, there's a lot more there. And we're going to talk more about our main characters after discussing all three of these. But what's fun, particularly about this special, and we'll say in Muppets, is all of the cameo characters. That's what makes it fun and nostalgic for me to watch. So I want to know from you, before I share mine, what were some other Disney characters that you were excited to see in the ensemble?
It kind of felt like a search and find of little Disney cameos, and broad stroke, I really just liked the inclusion of characters from other British literature Disney adaptations like Robin Hood or The Wind in the Willows, I think one of the most well done but so short is Mr. Toad as Fezziwig. That just feels like perfect casting to me.
Absolutely same. I really wish they had given him dialogue, because it seems like it's just so, his personality fits so perfectly into Fezziwig's personality. It seems like if it was longer, that would be the first thing to add, probably. Just give Mr. Toad a little bit of give him a song, give him some
just one tally-ho.
One tally-ho. Let him break some things.
Yeah, I think Mr. Toad characters were my favorite to see. And I think now, especially, more people might be watching this with access to Disney Plus who maybe have never seen it before, or it's been a long time, that I feel like a lot of these characters, they wouldn't recognize. Maybe they'd be like, oh, that's Mr. Toad, but I've never seen his short. So as like those of us here who are more Disney fans, us listening, who are more diehard Disney fans, like we would enjoy this. So we enjoy this so much when you see them. One that stood out to me was from the Aristocats, the goose. His name's escaping me. Not the two sisters, their uncle.
Is it Waldo?
Yes.
Uncle Waldo, yes.
I think that's it, Uncle Waldo. He's in Fezziwig's party. And like after I watched it the second time, I saw the Robin Hood characters. You see Mr. Toad, the two charity gentlemen
Rat
at the
and
beginning.
Molly.
Yeah, they show up, and his horse, Donald has his horse hooked up to his carriage. But that one, I was like, oh, that's a real deep cut. That, a side character of the Aristocats. But yeah, I didn't make that connection though, Courtney, that it's so obvious now that you said it, that they're all British.
Well, I don't know that the Aristocats is, but yes, the other two.
Yes, he is. He's
okay.
visiting from London.
Yes, you're right.
He's British.
Sorry, that's in France. Yeah.
Yeah, they're all British. They're visiting France because they're migrating.
Yeah, it felt very purposeful to me in terms of what they were including. So that's fun getting older as you're like, oh yeah, those connections make sense.
It's kind of like the MCU of classic Disney characters. They're all allowed to now exist in a space together, which is fun without acknowledging like you're Mickey, you're Donald. They are very much their character, which is really cool.
Yeah, that's, I think, something that's especially unique to this film. And next up for us is The Muppet Christmas Carol, which celebrated its 29th anniversary just yesterday on December 11th at the time of our recording. This Christmas musical comedy was directed by Jim Henson's son Brian Henson in his feature directorial debut and features a screenplay by Jerry Jewell. This was the first film to be produced following the untimely deaths of the Muppets creator Jim Henson and performer Richard Hunt, and the film is dedicated to both men. This film was released in a partnership between Jim Henson Productions and Walt Disney Pictures and distributed again through Disney's Buena Vista Pictures. The film stars Sir Michael Caine in the role of Ebenezer Scrooge, accompanied by Kermit the Frog as Bob Cratchit, original Muppets in the role of each Christmas ghost, the Great Gonzo as Charles Dickens, and Rizzo the Rat as himself. So let's repeat again here, overall likes and dislikes about this adaptation.
I mean, this one is by far my favorite, and I've seen nearly all 16 dozen of them. It's my favorite Christmas movie, one of my favorite movies, period. And I think that what it does so beautifully is it's not a completely faithful adaptation. It does take its own take on the story. But I think that in terms of this idea of thinking about the story as not so much a story of a jerk who learns a lesson, but as a person who is isolated, who doesn't understand what a lonely child he's always been, who gradually comes to understand that he's capable of receiving and giving love himself. And I think the way that when I saw it in theaters as a kid, I was just overwhelmed by it, because I wasn't expecting Muppets, and left just feeling so sad. And I think that watching it now, you can really kind of see that everyone who made this movie is going through it. They just lost Jim Henson and Richard Hunt, and they're all kind of coming together to tell the story in his absence. And they've really kind of reframed it as what did Jim Henson do for all of us as this warm, loving father, paternal figure? What would it be like if somebody didn't get to be part of that community? And can the story be about the community reaching out to him and bringing him back into the fold. And coupled with Paul Williams and his songs, which I guess we'll talk about in a little bit, I think there's just so much that really is beautiful about every aspect of the film almost.
How can you not love the Muppets? And I love so much, like any Muppet movie, how well the Muppets just meld into any setting that they're in, and how committed any live actor is to accepting that they are part of this story. And it helps the Muppet ridiculousness stand out more because they're treated like they're anyone else. They're not a puppet, or like we have Victorian England and no one thinks it's weird that Bob Cratchit's a frog married to a pig. Like, those are the things you just accept as Muppets. And I think it makes the story also relatable while also getting that fun from the Muppets. So I too love it. I love that there's music. Yeah, this is the one I remember a little bit more than Mickey's Christmas Carol. So I think this was more of my introduction to A Christmas Carol. I think this is the first film that I've ever seen of A Christmas Carol. So this is what I know as A Christmas Carol, with how the ghosts act and look. And I was happy to see, watching all three and reading the book, how much dialogue is from the book that's also in the film. I was pleasantly surprised at how authentic really this telling is. So that was really exciting for me to see. I don't know if I have any dislikes. I just always have fun watching this. It's perfect. I know not everyone's going to agree with that statement, but for me, it's the one I grew up on. So for me, it's perfect.
Cosign.
I am ashamed to admit, but I did not grow up with this one, and I am a Muppets fan. It's very clear in some of our other episodes. I'm sorry, I have a story for each of these. I feel like I'm having like an Ebenezer Scrooge self-aware, like, Courtney, you're a self-centered only child moment, but I do have a story for each, and mine for this is that I remember being at like a youth group Christmas party, and this was on in the background, and we were doing like our white elephant gift exchange, but like I kept looking over and was like, man, this is funny, like I want to sit down and watch this, but it just wasn't as accessible. It wasn't a VHS that my family owned. So I was really, this is going to be embarrassing to admit, but I was really excited to sit down and watch it in 2019 when Disney Plus started, because I was like, it's here. I can watch it anytime. And I have to say, over the past 3 Christmas seasons, watching that, it has grown on me every time. And if Doug were on the show, he would co-sign it as well, because we probably watched it 3 times in the past month, you know, one of which preparing for the show, but then we just put it on last night because it's so good, and it has gotten better for me each time. It's just, I love the Muppets so much, so I wish that I had the childhood memories associated with it, because y'all got like an extra 30 years with it that I didn't have.
I guess the only thing I could probably say against it is that it maybe does Fred a little dirty, in that it makes him seem like a really big jerk in ways that he doesn't in the book. Because when you visit Fred's party in the book, yeah, they do the whole 20 questions. Oh, it's Ebenezer Scrooge. Everyone hates him. But then Fred says, but look, I love the guy. He's great. I feel bad for him. Hopefully one day he comes. Let's all have a toast to him. Whereas in this version, it just feels like Fred is just, he hates his uncle. He loves making fun of him. He doesn't really seem to think he'll ever actually come to his party. And it's the one little mean-spirited aspect that I don't know that I'd change it. It does serve a good purpose in the film, but it's the only sour note, I think.